The text came in at exactly 9:07 in the morning. "Hey, sweetie," it read. "Bad news. There's a power outage at the cabin. We're canceling the reunion. Stay safe and warm at home. Love you." It was from my mother, Diane. I blinked at the screen, disappointment blooming in my chest. I had been looking forward to this weekend. A rare family gathering at our old lakefront cabin in Ashbrook, something we hadn't done in years. I had even taken Friday off from work. But if the power was out, what choice did we have? I sighed, placed my phone on the kitchen counter, and turned on the kettle for tea. That afternoon, I tried to stay positive. I cleaned the apartment, did some laundry, even started reading that novel I had been putting off. But when I sat down with a blanket and my tea later that evening, something made me open Instagram. I wish I hadn't. The first post on my feed was from Chloe, my cousin. A group selfie. A caption that read, "Best family weekend ever. So grateful for these people." I stared at the screen, confused. Everyone was there. My parents, aunts and uncles, cousins. Even my sister Sierra. They were standing on the porch of the cabin. The very same cabin I had just been told was unusable. I scrolled through more photos. The kitchen lit brightly. The fireplace crackling in the background. Plates of food on the long wooden table. Kids running on the dock in swimsuits. There was no power outage. No cancellation. Just one person missing, me. My heart sank like a stone. It wasn't a mistake. It was a lie. I zoomed in on a picture of my father, Frank, laughing as he grilled burgers. I saw my mother arranging flowers on the table. I saw Sierra raising a glass of wine and a toast. And I realized something that made my stomach twist. They had gone out of their way to exclude me. For years I had been the dependable one. The quiet one. The one who never needed anything. I was the responsible older sister, the accountant who paid her way, stayed out of trouble, and helped out when she could. Sierra was the golden girl, the yoga instructor who dropped out of college, who flitted from dream to dream, yet always received our parents' admiration. I used to think it was just a difference in personality. But as I stared at those photos, the illusion shattered. This wasn't the first time I'd been accidentally left out. I thought of birthdays I hadn't been told about, family brunches I saw later in Instagram stories. Once, a baby shower I was supposedly invited to, only to be told later that the date had changed last minute. How many of those were lies? My hands trembled as I opened the text again. There's a power outage. We're canceling the reunion. A bold-faced lie. My mother had lied to me. My entire family had gone along with it. I wasn't just forgotten. I was deliberately excluded. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat still, cold realization washing over me like ice water. My entire life, I had played the role of the dependable daughter. The helper. The silent observer. And this is what I got in return. Lies, silence, and erasure. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice overly cheerful. "Hey, honey. Hope you're having a relaxing weekend." I saw Chloe's photos. I said flatly, "Silence." Then a small, nervous laugh. "Oh, that? Well, it was kind of a last-minute thing. You know how Sierra loves to host. And we didn't want to put pressure on you to come out so far." "There was no power outage," I said. "You told me it was canceled." Her tone shifted. "Leah, don't make this into a thing. You always get so sensitive about these things." My jaw clenched. "You lied to me. You made me spend the weekend alone while everyone else was together." There was a pause, then that cold, clipped tone she always used when she wanted to shut me down. "Maybe if you tried harder to connect with people, you'd be invited more often." I hung up before she could say another word. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Something inside me had snapped. A silence I had kept for years, one built from being overlooked, dismissed, and gaslight, finally cracked open. I wasn't imagining the distance. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being erased, and I had let them do it. But not anymore. I didn't know what I would do yet. I didn't know how deep the betrayal went. But I knew I was done pretending. Done chasing approval. Done staying quiet. Something had begun. And it wouldn't end with just a phone call. The following morning, I stood in front of my window watching the spring rain tap gently against the glass. The city was quiet, still sleepy from the weekend, but my mind was wide awake, running through every memory I had brushed aside as irrelevant. Now, Each one glowed with a painful clarity. The forgotten birthday calls. The vague responses to messages. The family photos I wasn't in. One by one, they stacked into a towering truth I could no longer ignore. I booted up my laptop and opened my photo archive. I clicked through years of digital memories. There were plenty of pictures with Sierra, her yoga retreats in Bali, her studio launch, her beachside meditations, all posted with captions like "grateful for the support of my amazing family." I wasn't in any of them, not even in the comments. When I checked my messages from around those times, I found faint hints. A canceled dinner, a schedule mix-up, a forgotten invite. My gut twisted. They had always had a reason, always had an excuse. But now I understood the truth. The truth was they had slowly pushed me out, and I had helped them do it by staying quiet. I opened my emails and scrolled. There it was, last Thanksgiving. I had spent the entire morning helping my mother cook. Stuffing, pie, even her roasted carrots she insisted only turned out right in her oven. I remembered the ache in my feet, the soreness in my back, the joy of feeling included. But a week later, Sierra had posted a photo set. So thankful I could host this year. All the cooking was worth it. The captions praised her. The comments applauded her. My mom had replied, "Couldn't have done it without you, sweetie." My name never appeared. It wasn't just what they did. It was how they rewrote history, painted me out of the frame, one photo and caption at a time. I leaned back in my chair, a burning behind my eyes. I thought about Sierra, my sister who had once braided my hair before school and whispered secrets in the dark when we were kids. Somewhere along the way, we had taken different paths. I followed structure. She chased light, but I had always thought love held us together. Maybe it did, or maybe it only flowed in one direction. My phone buzzed. A new message from Sierra. I hesitated before opening it. "Hey," it said. "I heard you're upset. I didn't mean for you to find out that way. It was supposed to be a low-key thing. Mom thought you'd feel out of place. Hope you're not mad." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I started typing, stopped, then deleted everything. What was the point? There was no apology in her words. No ownership. Just justification. I powered off my phone and dropped it onto the bed. Later that afternoon, I walked to a cafe near my apartment, needing to breathe air that didn't feel like a lie. I sat by the window, sipping coffee, watching strangers come and go. Families, friends, people who smiled with no hidden edge, people who weren't pretending. For the first time in years, I imagined what it would be like to build something new. A circle of people who saw me, truly saw me, and didn't rewrite me out of their lives. When I got home, I began to write. Not a letter, not a message, a record. I opened a blank document and titled it The Pattern. I wrote down every instance I could remember, with dates, names, and what I had been told. I wasn't sure why I was doing it yet. Maybe it was just to feel sane. Maybe it was the accountant in me, needing order and chaos. Or maybe it was something else, a need to prepare for whatever this would become. As I typed, the dots began to connect. One memory stood out more than the rest. Years ago, when I was 24, my grandfather Harold had passed away. He and I had been close. He used to say I was the one who reminded him of Grandma, steady, thoughtful, strong. After the funeral, my father had taken me aside, said he needed me to sign something. Just some documents for medical proxies and estate clarity, he had said. I signed them without thinking. That memory had lived quietly in a back corner of my mind. But now it pressed forward with alarming weight. What if this went beyond just emotional exile? What if it wasn't just about being excluded from dinners? I shut my laptop, suddenly sick to my stomach. I needed answers. Not just about family gatherings, but about money, about decisions, about inheritance. I remembered Miriam Evans, an old family friend, retired now, who used to help with our finances after Grandpa passed. She had always liked me, always asked how I was doing. Maybe she could shed light on what really happened all those years ago. I dug out her number from an old contact list and dialed. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered, cautious but warm. "Leah," she asked. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated, then said quietly, "I think I need to understand something about my grandfather's estate." There was a long pause on the other end. A breath. Then a voice that sounded like guilt wrapped in relief. I was hoping you'd call, she said. And with that, the real unraveling began. Miriam chose a quiet corner table at a small bookstore cafe, far from the ears of gossip and familiarity. When I arrived, she was already seated with a cup of mint tea in front of her and a manila envelope clutched in both hands like it held something living. Her face had aged, her posture more fragile than I remembered, but her eyes, those sharp, perceptive eyes, were exactly the same. "I'm sorry it took this long," she said softly as I sat across from her. "But I think it's time you knew." I didn't speak. I waited, watching her slide the envelope slowly across the table until it rested in front of me. "I managed your grandfather's estate until I retired," she began. "Harold was very clear in his instructions. He left behind a sizable inheritance, cash, property, and investment accounts, and he designated specific portions for you and Sierra. But more importantly, he made you the primary beneficiary. He wanted you to have the resources to live independently. He trusted you." I frowned. "I never received anything." Miriam nodded slowly. "I know, because your father became the trustee after Harold passed. And once you signed the power of attorney document he presented, everything changed. He redirected the assets and kept everything quiet. Your inheritance was never transferred to you. Instead, it was funneled." She paused, searching for gentler words. "To Sierra." I pulled the envelope closer and opened it. Inside were copies of bank statements, notarized documents, wire transfer records, and legal forms dated back over a decade. I scanned the pages, my fingers trembling. My name was on the original trust. And so was a clause. At age 25, I was to receive full access. But I never did. Instead, I saw transactions. Transfers into an account under Sierra's name. A string of business development expenses. Loans that were never repaid. Thousands. Then tens of thousands. Eventually, over $300,000. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "You're sure these are real?" I asked, though I knew they were. Miriam nodded solemnly. "I kept copies because I had a feeling something wasn't right. But I stayed silent. I told myself it wasn't my place. That your parents were managing things how they saw fit. But I was wrong. And when I saw that social media post, the one where your mother claimed you were unstable, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. My vision blurred, rage and grief fighting for space in my chest. I had worked 2 jobs through college, taken out loans, skipped vacations, helped my parents pay off their mortgage, and the whole time, they had been sitting on my inheritance, using it, spending it, on Sierra. "You didn't deserve this, Leah," Miriam said gently. "And you're not alone. Not anymore." The envelope felt heavy in my hands, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. Proof, not just of theft, but of betrayal, of years I had been lied to, gaslight, rewritten. I stood to leave, the documents tucked safely in my bag. Before I walked out, I turned to Miriam. "Thank you," I said. "This changes everything." Back in my apartment, I spread the documents across the table. I read every line, every date, every signature. My mind ticked like a machine, trained by years of accounting audits and compliance cases. And then, I did what I knew how to do best. I built a file. It started with a spreadsheet. Every missing fund. Every unlawful transaction. Every misuse of the power of attorney. By the end of the night, I had compiled a clean, damning narrative. But I wasn't finished. I called an old classmate, Nora Patel, who now specialized in estate fraud. We met the next afternoon. She listened quietly as I laid out everything, from the reunion lie to the inheritance theft. When I finished, she looked at me, not with pity, but with fire. "This is a textbook case of financial exploitation," she said. "You have 2 options, civil court to recover assets, or criminal charges, possibly both." The words tasted like justice, but I wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. Instead, I sent a message. To all 3 of them, Diane, Frank, and Sierra. "I know everything. I have the documents. We need to talk. Come to my place. Saturday at noon. No threats. No emotion. Just a summons." I imagined their reactions. Panic. Denial. More lies. But it didn't matter. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. And when Saturday came, I would be waiting, with every receipt, every signature, and every truth they thought they had buried. Saturday arrived under a slate-gray sky, heavy with rain clouds. My apartment was spotless, every surface wiped clean, every chair positioned deliberately around the dining table. On the table, I had placed 3 identical folders, neatly labeled with their names, Diane, Frank, and Sierra. Each one contained copies of the documents Miriam had given me, the spreadsheet I had built, and a letter drafted by Nora Patel outlining their options, full restitution and a signed confession, or immediate legal proceedings for fraud and theft. I checked the time. 11:58. At exactly noon, the intercom buzzed. When I opened the door, the 3 of them walked in like they were stepping onto a stage. My mother wore a long camel coat and that familiar tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. My father looked stern, like this was some kind of performance review. Sierra was visibly anxious, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. My mother spoke first. "Leah, sweetheart, I'm glad you came to your senses and called this meeting. We've all been so upset." I said nothing, just gestured to the chairs. They sat. I slid the folders toward them without a word. "What is this?" my father asked, frowning as he opened his. "Read it," I said. "Everything you need to know is in there." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the rustle of paper. Then came the silence, a long-waited silence. My father's face went pale. My mother's lips parted slightly, as though a scream was trying to escape but couldn't. Sierra's hands trembled as she flipped through the documents, then froze on a page with her name and a large wire transfer highlighted in red. "What is this supposed to mean?" my mother asked, her voice brittle. "It means I know everything," I said calmly. "I know about the inheritance, the properties, the power of attorney, the accounts you drained, and I know who it was meant for me." My father tried to recover. "Leah, this is absurd. That money was family money. We used it where it was needed." "No," I said sharply. "You used it where you wanted. You left me in student debt, knowing my grandfather had provided for me. You watched me struggle while you funded Sierra's retreats and yoga studios." My sister finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know it was from your share. They told me it was from their savings." I turned to her. "That's a lie. Look at the statements. The transfers were made directly from my trust, with memos calling them business investments. You knew. Maybe not at first, but you knew." Sierra said nothing. She looked down at her lap, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "This is blackmail," my mother snapped, standing to her feet. "You're threatening your own family. After everything we've done for you." I stood too. "No. This is a choice. Either you return what's left, sign the confession, and let this end quietly, or I go to the police with everything. The lawyer's letter outlines the consequences. I suggest you read it carefully." "You wouldn't dare," my father growled. "I already have," I replied. "The case file is ready. The only thing stopping me from submitting it is this meeting." They all went quiet again. My mother's hands clenched into fists. My father stared hard at the table, his jaw tight. Sierra wiped at her eyes, but didn't protest. "I'll give you 48 hours, I said. "That's more than generous." "You'll ruin this family," my mother hissed. I shook my head. "You did that a long time ago." Without another word, I walked to the door and opened it. One by one, they filed out, each with their folder in hand. No hugs, no apologies, just silence and stormy faces. The door clicked shut behind them, and I stood there, chest rising and falling, not with fear, but with something else. Clarity, power. I didn't expect them to do the right thing. I had lived too long in the shadow of their decisions to believe in redemption. But I had given them a choice, and what they chose now, that would be on them. I turned off the lights, went to my room, and sat by the window. The rain had finally started, tapping gently against the glass again. 48 hours. The countdown had begun. The next 48 hours passed like a slow boil. I kept my phone close, my email refreshed every hour, waiting, not for their apology, but for their choice. I didn't expect remorse. I didn't even expect guilt. But I did expect fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of consequences. Fear of me, finally stepping out from the shadows they had carefully pushed me into. But instead, what came was silence. By the first night, nothing. By the second morning, still nothing. No message. No call. No confession. And then, on the afternoon of a second day, everything cracked open. It started with a phone call from Nora, my lawyer. They didn't just refuse, she said. They've started covering their tracks. What do you mean? I have a contact in estate auditing. Your father is closing joint accounts. Properties are being quietly sold. Documents are being destroyed. They're scrambling. I sat down slowly, the breath catching in my throat. They're trying to erase the evidence, I whispered. Too late for that, Nora replied. We have what we need. I've already prepared the filing documents. Say the word, and we move forward. I looked around my apartment. The folders still sat on the dining table, untouched since the confrontation. But they weren't just paper anymore. They were my protection, my proof, my line in the sand. Do it, I said. Within hours, the complaints were officially filed. By morning, the police were knocking on their doors. The first to fall was my father. Agents showed up at his office. Colleagues watched as he was escorted out, not with handcuffs yet, but with tension thick in the air. My phone lit up with notifications, some from distant relatives, some from people I hadn't heard from in years. Whispers were starting to spread. Next was Sierra. Her yoga studio, which had been funded almost entirely with my inheritance, was flagged as an asset under investigation. Within days, her accounts were frozen, her business closed. She posted vague stories on social media about betrayal and cleansing her space of toxicity, never naming me, but I knew exactly what she meant. And then there was my mother, the woman who had orchestrated lies like an artist, who knew how to weaponize kindness and wield silence like a blade. She was the last to react, the most strategic of all. But not even she could outrun the truth. When officers arrived during one of her community committee meetings, she was mid-sentence, leading a discussion about a local charity fundraiser. The photos went viral by evening. The image of her being questioned while still clutching her clipboard was shared across our hometown's local network. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. Relatives who had ignored me before went quiet. Aunt Carla deleted every family photo from her profile. Uncle Darren sent a single message. We didn't know. But I didn't reply, because they had known enough. Enough to attend gatherings I wasn't invited to. Enough to praise Sierra while I disappeared into the background. Enough to let it happen. I didn't need their pity. I had the truth. And the law. Nora called again 2 days later. We have a plea offer, she said. They're not fighting the charges. Not anymore. They want to settle. Restitution. I asked. Full, she replied. Plus penalty interest. Properties too. We'll get back as much as possible. They're trying to avoid jail time. I nodded slowly, my voice steady. Then accept it. The fight wasn't over. There would be paperwork, negotiations, court appearances, but the walls they had built, pristine and curated, had collapsed. And in their place, there was nothing but dust and truth. That evening, I sat by my window, staring at the street below. The rain had stopped. The clouds had thinned. A soft pink light touched the buildings, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. Not joy, not celebration, just relief. Because I hadn't just exposed their lies. I had reclaimed my voice. And for the first time, they were the ones who had to listen. The settlement took weeks to finalize, but in the end, every signature was on paper. Frank Monroe, my father, admitted to violating the terms of a trust. Diane, my mother, acknowledged her role in misrepresenting the documents I had signed at 18. Sierra confessed, under legal advisement, that she had received and knowingly used funds that were never hers to begin with. The amount recovered was substantial, nearly $230,000, plus the 2 remaining properties in Harold Monroe's name. Nora managed it all with calm precision. She walked me through every clause, every agreement, ensuring nothing was left vague. By the time the last document was notarized, there was nothing left for them to hide behind. They were allowed to stay out of prison, just barely, in exchange for full restitution, community service, and the permanent loss of control over any shared family assets. Their reputations, however, were beyond saving. The local paper ran a story with the headline, "Asterisk Family Faces Legal Reckoning After Financial Deception Revealed." Asterisk, there were no names in the title, but anyone who knew us didn't need them. I moved out of my apartment 2 weeks later. The building, once my haven, had begun to feel like a shell. Too many memories clung to the corners, the silence of that first message, the waiting, the confrontation, the unraveling. I needed a clean slate, somewhere untouched by their shadows. Denver called to me in a way no place ever had. It was far enough from them and close enough to something new. I found a small brick townhouse in a quiet neighborhood with wide trees and dog walkers and neighbors who smiled but didn't pry. My first night there, I unpacked only the essentials: books, kitchenware, clothes, and one box, the one with the final legal documents, the apology letters written by force, and the photos Miriam had given me of my grandfather. I opened that box last. Inside, wrapped in a velvet cloth, was a framed photo of Harold and me sitting by the edge of a lake. I must have been 8 or 9. He had his arm around my shoulders and was pointing toward something out of frame, his face full of quiet joy. I remembered that moment vividly. He had just told me, "People won't always see you for who you are, Leah. But that's not your fault. Your job is to remember who you are even when they don't." I placed the photo on the mantel, the first thing to claim space in my new life. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Not the bitter quiet of exclusion, or the oppressive hush of unspoken truths, but a peace that hummed softly in the background. A silence that held space rather than snuffed it out. Still, there were moments when my phone would buzz, and I'd brace for another spin of the narrative. But it never came. Diane and Frank had gone quiet. No messages. No emails. Not even a holiday card. Sierra posted nothing for weeks, then slowly returned with yoga mantras and quotes about letting go. None of them ever reached out to apologize. Not genuinely. Not directly. And honestly, I didn't want them to. I didn't need a redemption arc for them. I needed the story to end. I filled my days with work, more focused than ever, and nights with reading, long walks, and slowly rebuilding what it meant to belong. Friends came into the picture, new and surprising ones. A neighbor named Callie who brought over warm muffins just because, and a colleague who invited me to a book club I never thought I'd enjoy but did. Even Miriam called once a month just to check in, her voice always firm, always kind. It wasn't the family I lost, but it was the family I chose. And every time I walked into my house, dropped my bag at the door, and looked up to see that photo of my grandfather, I knew I was no longer waiting to be invited. I had finally given that invitation to myself. And for once, I was exactly where I belonged. Months slipped by like wind through autumn trees, quiet and constant. The aftermath of a settlement faded from headlines, but its ripples remained. Though the legal matters were resolved, the emotional wreckage they left behind still echoed in subtle ways, in the way I scanned crowds automatically, half expecting to see their faces, or in the lingering pause before I trusted someone new. I hadn't spoken to Diane or Frank since the settlement was signed. Sierra, surprisingly, had sent one message, a long, meandering email that tried to walk the tightrope between apology and justification. She wrote about feeling caught in the middle, about believing our parents when they told her I wouldn't care about the money, that I didn't need it. She said she didn't realize the extent of what had been done until it was too late. But the most telling part of her letter was the end. "I hope one day you'll forgive me," she wrote, "because you're the only sister I've got." I didn't respond. Forgiveness isn't something that blooms from a single sentence, especially not when the wound is still fresh and the blade that cut you was handed down by those who should have protected you. Still, I reread the message more than once, not out of sympathy, but to remind myself of how deeply I had allowed their version of love to overwrite my own boundaries. I had mistaken silence for peace, tolerance for loyalty, and invisibility for strength. But strength isn't about staying quiet. Strength is about knowing when to speak and when to walk away. It wasn't just the money they had taken from me. It was time. Years of financial stress, missed opportunities, and emotional confusion. They had rewritten me as the cold, distant sister. The uptight daughter. The one who never showed up. And I had believed it. I had absorbed that role until it molded my posture, my voice, my entire way of being. But not anymore. One Saturday morning, as spring began to lean toward summer, I returned to the old Monroe family cabin. I hadn't been there since the day I saw it in Chloe's Instagram photo, the day of the fake power outage, the day that unraveled everything. Now that the property was legally mine, I had the keys. Driving through Ashbrook brought back a strange mix of comfort and bitterness. The trees were the same. The lake sparkled the way it always had. But the memories, some warm, some sharp, layered themselves thick as I pulled into the gravel driveway. The house looked abandoned. Windows shuttered. The porch sagging slightly. I stepped out of the car, breathed in the scent of wet leaves and lake water, and unlocked the front door. Inside, dust cloaked every surface. Furniture covered in white sheets. Silence, vast and hollow. But it didn't feel haunted. It felt empty, like a stage waiting for a new story. I walked from room to room, touching walls I hadn't seen in years. The kitchen still had my grandmother's ceramic mixing bowls. The bedroom I once shared with Sierra still had the sticker-covered dresser we fought over. But there were no ghosts here. Only choices. I spent the next few weekends renovating. Not to restore the house to what it had been, but to claim it as something new. I painted over the faded walls, removed every photo I hadn't taken myself, replaced the family portraits with artwork I loved. I planted herbs by the window. I installed new lights. I cleared out closets stuffed with forgotten things. And in the corner of the living room, on a shelf I built myself, I placed the photo of Grandpa Harold and me. I decided to keep the cabin, not as a monument to the Monroes, but as a sanctuary from them. Over time, I invited people into this space. People who didn't ask for my family name, who didn't measure my worth by stories they'd been told. Friends from work, neighbors, even Miriam, who brought wine and declared the lake good for healing old bones. They laughed in the kitchen, left their shoes by the door, helped me hang fairy lights on the porch. And in their presence, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Not the kind you're born into. The kind you build. Sometimes, I still think about what they left behind. Not the property, not the money, but the version of me they never took the time to know. The daughter who was loyal, quiet, responsible, and invisible until she stopped being any of those things. And while they may never understand the cost of what they did, I've come to realize I don't need them to. Because I know who I am now. And that is something they can never take away again. There's a box in the back of my new bedroom closet. It's tucked beneath spare blankets and old photo albums, and inside are letters I never mailed. Pages upon pages, some handwritten, others typed and printed, all addressed to the people who shaped my pain. I never intended to send them. They were never meant to be read. They were simply part of the healing. A purge of silence. A way to take the storm that lived inside my chest and pin it down with words. The first letter was to Diane. I had started it the night after I discovered the truth, after the cafe meeting with Miriam. It began formally, like a business memo, but quickly cracked open into fury. I told her how it felt to be erased one holiday at a time. How I spent years trying to decode the lukewarm smiles, the half-hugs, the way she always referred to me in conversations with others like a footnote. I wrote about the ache of seeing her pride shine so easily for Sierra, and how I kept waiting for it to shine for me too. But the line that stopped me cold, the one that made me fold the paper and put it in the box, simply read, "I spent 32 years trying to make you love me the way I needed. You never did." Then came Frank's letter. His was shorter, blunter. I told him I remembered every time he praised Sierra's flexibility and laughed at my schedules. How he made jokes about me being too serious. How he once told a friend at a barbecue, in front of me, that at least Sierra would give him grandkids who weren't made of spreadsheets. I wrote about the moment I signed those legal documents at 18, how I trusted him because he was my father, because I thought the line between guidance and betrayal was one he would never cross. But he did. And worse, he never thought I'd notice. Sierra's letter took the longest to write. Because with her, there was love once. Real, tangled, childhood love. I wrote about how we used to talk about opening a coffee shop together. How we played games where we were detectives and sisters and mermaids all in the same afternoon. I wrote about the time she gave me her favorite scarf when I had my first breakup. And then I wrote about the slow drift, how she let them feed her the version of me that was cold, unapproachable, unkind. I told her I didn't know if she believed it or if it was just easier than questioning them. But the result was the same. She chose comfort over truth. These letters will never be sent. Not because I'm afraid of their reactions, but because I no longer need them to validate what I know. They are my evidence, not for court, but for myself. That I saw it clearly. That I felt it deeply. That I survived it completely. One rainy evening in June, I sat on the porch of the cabin with a warm cup of tea and read them all again. One by one. And instead of anger, what I felt was distance. Not detachment, not numbness, but distance that had form and shape. Like a landscape I had once lived in, now seen from the rearview mirror. The silence from them had remained. No new messages. No apologies. Not even shallow ones. The world they built had collapsed, but they had simply moved deeper into the rubble, pretending it was still a house. I no longer felt the need to check their social media, or read between the lines of Sierra's cryptic quotes about growth and wounds. I had stopped explaining myself to people who once questioned why I made such a big deal about everything. I surrounded myself with people who didn't need the backstory to believe in my pain. They believed me simply because I said it hurt. And that was freedom. Sometimes healing doesn't roar. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or neat conclusions. Sometimes it's a quiet realization on a porch, during a storm, as you read a letter that no longer cuts like it used to. Sometimes healing is simply the moment you understand. You made it through. I placed the letters back in their box, closed the lid, and pushed it further back into the closet. They had served their purpose. From here forward, my story belonged to me. Not to those who twisted it. Not to those who ignored it. And certainly not to those who tried to silence it. My story had found its voice. And it was louder than their silence would ever be. There's a strange kind of lightness that comes when someone finally sees you. Not the version of you that fits their expectations. Not the performance you wear to keep peace. But you, unfiltered, complicated, honest. The version of yourself that you've hidden so long. Even you forgot she was there. That feeling came one Thursday afternoon, months after the case had ended. I was sitting in a meeting room at work, presenting a quarterly audit breakdown to the new CFO, Mr. Ellison. It was a routine review, just numbers, forecasts, risks, margins. But something in the way he listened, the questions he asked, the way he looked at my spreadsheets with genuine curiosity rather than glazed-over politeness, it jolted me. After the meeting, he stopped me in the hallway. "You've got a mind built for precision," he said. "And integrity. You'd be surprised how rare that combination is." I smiled, mumbled something polite, and walked away, but the word stuck. Integrity. Precision. Not cold. Not rigid. Not difficult. Words that were never used on me before, unless they were loaded with disappointment. Later that evening, I sat on my porch with my laptop and updated my resume. Not because I wanted to leave, but because for the first time, I saw myself as someone worth more than just keeping her head down. Someone who could speak up, take space, and expect to be taken seriously. This shift in how others saw me began to ripple through everything. At the community center where I volunteered, a teenage girl named Janelle, sharp-tongued and guarded, asked if I'd help her with her resume. She never asked anyone for anything, but she asked me. A few weeks after that, Miriam brought a friend to the cabin, a retired teacher named Irene who had heard about my story from local circles. She sat with me by the lake and said, "You remind me of myself at your age." People didn't know what to do with me either until I stopped asking for permission to exist. Her words filled something inside me I didn't know was still hollow. The more I allowed myself to be seen, truly seen, the more I realized how much energy I had spent shrinking, making myself smaller, easier to ignore. And now, with every full breath, every no I said without apology, every boundary I drew without shame, I could feel my spine lengthen. Of course, not everything was fixed. There were still moments when I doubted, when I caught a glimpse of a family walking together at the farmer's market and felt the tug of old longing, when I saw siblings laughing over coffee and wondered if maybe, in another version of my life, that could have been Sierra and me. But then I'd remember the price of pretending, the cost of chasing affection that always came with conditions, and I'd breathe through the ache and remind myself, wanting love isn't a flaw, but accepting less than you deserve just to feel close to it, that's a wound that never heals right. One Sunday I received a letter, a real one, handwritten, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was from my father. Just a few lines. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll understand why we did what we did." There was no apology, No acknowledgement of harm. Just the soft, cowardly murmur of regret without ownership. I folded the letter and placed it in the fireplace. I didn't need to carry that weight anymore. I had built a life where I was no longer invisible, where my talents were valued, my voice heard, my story believed. A life where I was no longer the background character in someone else's narrative. I was the author now, and I no longer wrote from a place of begging to be loved. I wrote from truth, and that truth had become the foundation of a life I no longer wanted to escape from. Summer in Denver is different from anywhere else I've lived. The light seems to linger longer here, like the sky refuses to let go of the day. It's in that golden stretch of evening, when the sun is low and the streets glow soft amber, that I find myself the most reflective, the most aware of the life I have built from the rubble of everything they tried to erase. One particular evening, I stood barefoot on the porch of the cabin, watching the lake shimmer beneath the horizon. The house behind me was no longer just a structure, it was a living testament. Not of survival, but of reclamation. Every plant I watered, every mug in the cupboard, every lamp I chose by hand, they were small declarations that I existed, that I belonged, that I could start again. Inside, a canvas sat on an easel. It was something I had started painting a few weeks prior, in a fit of inspiration that caught me off guard. I hadn't painted since college, not seriously. My mother always said it was impractical. A waste of time. People don't pay bills with paintbrushes, Leah, she used to scoff. So I buried that part of myself, the part that once found freedom in color. But that part had clawed its way back. The painting was abstract. Layers of overlapping lines, bursts of bold color, streaks of gold and crimson and deep navy. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive, and every time I looked at it, I saw a story only I could tell. That same evening, I received a call from a gallery. I had submitted the piece on a whim, encouraged by a local art collective that hosted open submissions. The woman on the other end sounded excited. "We'd love to feature it in our fall showcase," she said. "We think people will connect with the rawness, the truth." I smiled, stunned. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." After we hung up, I sat on the steps and watched the stars begin to bloom overhead. For the first time, I allowed myself to say something out loud, just to myself, but with conviction. I made it. Not in the glamorous, Instagram-worthy way my family used to chase, but in the real, quiet way that meant something. I had made it through the storm. I had found peace. I had rewritten the ending. And for once my name, Leah Monroe, didn't feel like an afterthought. It didn't echo with shame or quiet resentment. It felt grounded. It felt true. There's something sacred about choosing yourself after years of being told you're too much, or not enough, or not quite right. About shedding the layers they wrapped around you, duty, guilt, silence, and stepping fully into your own light. The fall showcase happened 2 months later. The gallery was small, tucked between a bakery and a vintage bookstore. But the room was full. My painting hung in the center of the main wall, spotlighted beneath a single soft bulb. People stood in front of it, discussing the textures, the movement, the emotion it evoked. A young girl asked her mother what she thought it meant, and the mother said, "I think it's about breaking free." I didn't cry, but I came close. Later that night, I walked home beneath a harvest moon, the breeze cool against my skin. I felt taller, not because anything about me had changed physically, but because I had stopped carrying what wasn't mine. My story was no longer hidden behind someone else's version. It was mine. Messy, real, brave. A name written in light, not in their approval, but in my own. And I would never let anyone dim it again. It happened on a quiet Sunday, almost a full year after that first lie unraveled everything. I was reorganizing the guest room at the cabin, now converted into a cozy studio for painting and journaling, when a package arrived at the door. No note, no return address, just a simple brown envelope with my name written in pen across the front. Inside were 3 items. The first was a faded photograph of my family at the lake, long before the fractures. I was around 9. Sierra had her arm wrapped tightly around my shoulder. Our parents stood behind us, smiling stiffly. It looked like a family. It looked like love, but I could see it now, the tightness in my own smile, the way my hand dangled at my side instead of returning my sister's embrace. Even then, I must have felt it. The subtle way I was always expected to adapt, to shrink, to accommodate their version of me. The second item was a check. Half the amount still owed from the settlement, unexpected, considering they had already fulfilled the legal requirement. In the memo line, one word was written, closure, and the third item was a letter. Short, unfolded. Leah, you were right. We did wrong. Take this and be free. F, asterisk asterisk. It didn't say sorry. It didn't even sign off with love, but it was something. A crumbled offering from someone who had finally realized that silence wasn't safety, it was guilt with a disguise. I sat on the edge of the porch, letter in hand, and breathed in the soft scent of pine and summer wind. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt complete. Because the truth is, I no longer needed that door to stay open. I had waited at it for too long, knocking, hoping, aching. But now I understood something deeper. Not every door deserves to be reopened. And not every family deserves a seat at your healed table. I stood, walked back inside, and placed the check in a drawer. Not out of anger, not out of fear, but because I didn't need their money to define my worth anymore. I would decide what to do with it when the time felt right. In the weeks that followed, I began planning something new. Not a business, not a gallery, but a retreat. A weekend workshop for women navigating family estrangement, betrayal, and self-reclamation. It would take place at the cabin, now renamed the Harbor. A place where survivors of emotional exile could write their own stories, share their truths, begin again. I designed the brochures myself, chose every word with care, and when I wrote the tagline, I paused and let my fingers hover before typing. You are not too much. You were just surrounded by people who wanted you small. That became the heart of it. And women came. From all over. They arrived with stories that mirrored mine, some louder, some quieter, all wrapped in the same ache. And together, we sat on the porch beneath the stars, telling the truths we had once whispered only to ourselves. We laughed. We cried. We rebuilt. And every time I looked around and saw the light in their eyes, I knew this, not the money, not the vengeance, not even the justice, was the gift. A life redefined. A door closed, and a new one opened wide. One that no one else had the power to shut again.